Hi, and welcome back to this third video on Garmin Pilot electronic flight bag. First of all, apologies to those of you that have been watching the videos in series. I had hoped to get this next video out a little bit quicker than I have, but I've had a few other projects on for the last couple of weeks. So it's been a little bit delayed, but here we are back again. So in this video, I thought I would start to take a look at doing some flight planning, and we'll do this video on VFR flight planning. So first of all, let's look at the ways that there are to create a flight plan with Garmin Pilot. The first one is probably the simplest. We can just tap where it says no flight plan at the top of the page, and we could add an origin. So our departure airport, in this case we go from North Weald, and let's put somewhere interesting in France. Troyes. So now we've got a start point and a destination, and we've got a line on the chart. So that's one and probably the simplest ways of doing a flight plan. And we'll get to modifying that because that's obviously not a realistic routing, but let's have a look at that in a second. The next way we could create a flight plan is we could press and hold on the map from a start point, and we can select this drawing tool here. And what we can now start to do is tap waypoints. So if we tap anywhere on the screen, you can see that we start to build up a flight plan. If we press save, we've got that there in our flight plan window. And the final way we can create a flight plan is literally by drawing. So we tap on the flight plan again, and we select freehand here, and we can literally kind of draw where we want to go, and from what we've drawn we end up with a flight plan. That's not my favorite way to do it. I mean, obviously you can modify that as you go, but just to let you know that it's an option. So let's clear these and go back to creating a sensible route that we can use for demonstration purposes. Okay, so now we've looked at the various ways we can create a flight plan. Let's just go back to a suitable route for us to look at all the features with. So from North Weald, Echo Golf Sierra X-Ray, to Lima Foxtrot Quebec Bravo, which is Troyes in France. So the first thing we can do here is figure out a good altitude that we might want to fly at. So this is already taking winds into account. And let's say that we're going to depart today at 6 o'clock. So we can now see if we went a little bit lower, we add a bit of time. If we go a little bit higher, we lose a bit of time. So we'll stay at our 5,500 feet because that's going to let us mess around with airspace a little bit. So we've now got ourselves a nice straight line, and we've picked an altitude. But we can already see there's some airspace here, but it'd be much easier if we could see that in terms of its vertical extent as well, because we're fairly sure that some of that's going to impact us. So the way we can do that is to use the profile view. So I'm in landscape mode, so I've got this arrow over here on the right, and this split screen view gives you access to a split screen way of looking at the different tools that Garmin Pilot gives us. And in this case, we want to look at flight profile. And we can already see that we're climbing into some airspace, and it's marked red, so it's TMA. So that is the London TMA, and if we tap on it, we can see the extent of it laterally. And if we tap up here, again, London TMA, and the lateral extents of that. So we'll probably need to do something about that. So let's get ourselves into some nice class delta at Southend. But we still need to prevent ourselves climbing up into this airspace en route. So one tool that we've got at our disposal is a long track offset. So what we would want to do, so if we hold two fingers, we can bring up this handy little measuring tool. So from our departure point, there we go. Let's just set that correctly. So I reckon sort of 10 miles would be a good point to start, or to make sure we stay low. If we tap on our departure airfield and we create an offset waypoint along track, so it's after North Weald, it's 10 miles, and we're going to give ourselves a buffer to the TMA which starts at 2,500 feet, and say we would stay down at 2,300 feet. So this has added this additional waypoint in the flight plan. And if we go back to the view here, yep, we can see that after departure, it keeps us low until we're outside of that first shelf. But equally, we want to make sure that we don't run into the airspace above. So I know that Southend would actually give us a transit something like 3,000 feet. So what we can do is say that at Southend, we can create ourselves an altitude constraint, and they're likely to tell us to cross around about 3,000 feet. There we go. Now if we start to look at this in profile view, we can see us stepping up, and again, we won't get climbed. I mean, we know Southend wouldn't climb us into the airspace above, but we can create ourselves a little reminder by doing something quite similar and saying that after Southend, we probably long track here, something like 17 miles. So we can go back to our flight plan, give ourselves a long track after 17 miles, and we'll keep ourselves down at 3,000 feet still. There we go. And now we can see it doesn't start to climb us up until it would be safe to do so, at least for our licenses. So the other thing we want to have a look at is how to kind of adjust the flight track. So if we press and hold, we then get the ability to move a point on the line. So I know, let's go via Dover for argument's sake. And then we're going to need to cross the FIR boundary at a defined point. So we do the same, press and hold, we'll go to Rinty here. And then look how things are looking down our route. Crossing through the airspace, crossing of the CTR there at Albert would be fine. Ah, there we go. We've got the Paris TMA here coming up, which we can't go into VFR. So let's look at adjusting this a bit. So what we can do, we don't need to necessarily look for a point, but if we say we want to go somewhere near there, we could either create just a lat long waypoint, or we could use an existing RLAV intersection. And the way you would do this obviously depends on what sort of equipment you've got in your aircraft. If you're only going to be flying with a single iPad, then maybe if you're flying VFR, you want to actually put some lat long waypoints in over some usable places like towns and roads and railway lines and forests and terrains and so on. If you've got a bit more equipment in your aircraft for redundancy, this will work fine. So there we go. We've now got ourselves a nice routing that takes us avoiding any airspace that we can't go into. And we look at it in profile view. Yep, we can see we're not going to run into anything. All looks good. Now, the other thing that we can do in this profile view is very cool, and it's a good example today. We can add overlays here, so we can have winds on and off. So we could either have no wind, there we go, winds disappeared, or we could have it as wind barbs. There we go. We can have an arrow and a speed. So whichever you prefer there. Pricing we can display. Airspace boundaries we're showing. We could turn Class E on if we want. We don't need to have Class E on because we're flying VFR. We don't need a clearance into Class E, at least in Europe. And we can also show cloud layers. And I think there is a bit of cloud around today. So probably, there we go. So we've said, so we've got a kind of broken layer at 3000 for the time that we're planning to fly, and then it's fairly clear, and then another broken layer. So we probably wouldn't necessarily be doing this VFR. So this would maybe be a clue, maybe to be adjusting your level. We'll leave it as it is for the purposes of the exercise here. But that's a really good way to visualize everything about the flight in terms of airspace and weather on one display. So we can look at it either in a bird's eye view or in profile view. Okay, so we've got a route that we're quite happy with. Let's have a look at what else is available to us here. This briefcase icon is particularly useful. So this is saying at the moment that everything that I need for my flight, procedures, taxi diagrams, en route charts, airport data, that's all up to date. If you've got a warning arrow there, you can see there's the ability to tell Garmin Pilot to download. It will actually sit there in the background if you've got an internet connection and start pulling in everything you need, but that's one thing that you probably want to check. So we've got everything we want there, and we can also say what we actually want it to download for us. So you can minimize the amount of data if you want to. That's all kind of set up for what we want. So that's good. Performance tab. So this relies on having a correct aircraft model defined within the application, and I'll do a separate video on creating models for aircraft because it's a little bit involved, but very well worth doing correctly to help with your flight planning. We normally fly the DA40s at 70% power. We can see if we use 75% power, again, it's showing us whether, how much time we would shave off, but how much additional fuel burn we would get. So we can adjust that to suit our flight. Then we can go over to the nav log. And if you wanted to, you could either share this data or print the nav log from here. You can also print it from elsewhere in trip planning, and we'll go into creating actual trips so that we could file. So we won't do that here. And then warnings, highest obstacle, 1,070 feet, highest terrain. And obviously we've said we're going to fly at 5,500 feet, so that's not a problem. And then we've got the ability to create a trip, which we'll do in just 1 second. The other thing I will just show, so if we go to the route and press this wiggly line, we have the ability to invert the flight plan, which would remove terminal procedures. So we won't do that now, but just so you're aware it's there, you can literally flip a route on its head if you want to. So let's go ahead and create trip, and that will take us to somewhere we can get all of our briefing information and start looking at filing. Okay, so when we create a trip, we eventually end up in this, basically a electronic flight plan form. Uh, so we can choose how we would file. In Europe, I really only have the choice of the global VFR filing service provided by Garmin for free. If you're in the US and Canada, I think you might have the ability to use flightplan.com. You've got the aircraft registration, call sign. Now this is quite cool. You'll see here um, it's saying whether at the departure airfield may be below the VFR minimums or personal VFR minimums that I've set. So it does give us a warning here. If you want to know how to set those minimums up, go back and have a look at my first video. Destination looks like it's going to be VFR. We've got our routing here. We haven't put any alternates in, but we could put an alternate here if you want. Let's just pick an airfield. There we go. The 2K on the other side of the channel. Cruise altitude, performance configuration that we'd selected. There we go. We can now have a look at the fuel planner. So our planned takeoff fuel is full main tanks. If we wanted to, you've got this very clever way of choosing how to load differently. So if we go into the planned takeoff fuel, we could say minimum fuel. So basically max, go all the way to the mass and balance limits. Or we could say, okay, well, when we land, we want 60 minutes reserve, including getting to the alternate. That says we need 108 litres. Or we've already got to our alternate. There we go, set a 45-minute reserve, 102.7 litres, and we were planning to go with 106. So we will just go with full tanks or full main tanks. Lessons on board. Let's take a couple of people with us this evening for dinner. And then we can have a look at the advanced filing information. This is mainly for survival information, so survival equipment. We're going to be taking our maritime equipment with our lighted life jackets, one dinghy with a capacity for 4 people, and our dinghy is indeed covered. So we'd almost be ready to file at this point, but let's just go and have a look at our mass and balance. So it's carried over. We go into edit load sheet here. So it's carried over the fuel that we did in our trip planning. We'll say we might need a few more bags for an overnight. 20 kilos of bags. There, that loading looks good with our 3 people. And we can see over here in the mass and balance chart. And again, this requires the aircraft profile to be correctly configured. But we can see that everything is within the envelope for mass and balance. It's just going to take a few seconds to sync everything up. And then we can go and retrieve a briefing. So I'll just pause the video. It's going to take a couple of minutes just to go to the internet and pull a whole bunch of information for us, and then we can come back and have a look what it looks like. Okay, so Garmin Pilot's been and done its magic and pulled down our briefing pack here. And what this has done is pulled us a whole load of information that might be useful for the safety of our flight. So here you can see a weather briefing with the fronts from the UK Met Office. significant weather at altitude, then the European significant weather chart from the French Met Office, and then we've got the GFS forecast here, which is super useful. So this is sort of showing what we would expect en route, and we could see actually in our profile view that when we were creating that looks very much like Garmin Pilot was showing us with the en route weather. And also in here, there we go, got SKUTs to help us interpret the weather, and we've got the NOTAMs en route as well. Basically a whole bunch of super useful information. NOTAMs, they're a bunch of garbage, aren't they? But they're all there, which is great. So we could then go to our form and we'd be ready to file and we could go flying. So I won't obviously send that live, but that's how we would do it. So I hope that was really useful. So we've looked at the three ways that we can create a flight plan. We've looked at how to adjust our routing. We've looked at a long track offsets, which are a useful little tool, especially VFR when you're trying to work around things vertically. And that should be good to fly. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've got any suggestions of anything that I missed in this video or anything you'd really like me to cover, please drop them in the comments and I will try to address them. Stand by for the next video. I'll do some IFR flight planning in the next video, which is just a little bit different. So thanks very much for watching and come back for the next